summer of 1903. Construction workers renovating the long-abandoned Ravens Hollow Manor in Clarksville, Tennessee, stumbled upon a discovery that would shake the town's history. Just 3 feet below the stone foundation, hidden in a rusted metal box wrapped in oilcloth, were 47 images not taken by investigators, but by someone with a far more disturbing intent. These pictures told the story of a revenge so meticulous, it took nearly 3 decades to comprehend the true horror of what happened to the Holloway family on the night of October 13, 1876. Every photograph captured moments of brutality, degradation, and torment, ending with 5 savage machete strikes in the darkness. Most horrifying of all the images revealed that the killer had forced Cornelius Holloway, the family's patriarch, and a man obsessed with photographing his power, to document the execution of his own family, one agonizing frame at a time. What was unearthed beneath Ravens Hollow wasn't just evidence of a crime, but a carefully crafted narrative of vengeance. Before diving deeper into this grim tale, consider subscribing to our channel. And let us know in the comments which state you're listening from, because what happened in Tennessee was not unique. Across the post-war South, hatred, power, and retribution often collided in ways that were easier to bury than remember. The real mystery haunting investigators in 1903 wasn't simply who committed the murders, but why someone felt the need to record every act of suffering with the same precision Cornelius once used to document others' pain. Clarksville in 1876 was a town straddling 2 worlds: the decaying power of the old plantation elite and the uncertain future of newly freed slaves and impoverished whites trying to survive in the ruins of the Confederacy. The Cumberland River wound through once profitable tobacco fields, now a tense landscape of forced cooperation between former masters and those they once enslaved. At the center of this uneasy peace stood Ravens Hollow Manor, a grand 3-story Georgian estate built in 1834 by tobacco baron Jeremiah Holloway. The estate had escaped wartime destruction thanks to Jeremiah's opportunistic allegiance switching during Union occupation. By the time of the murders, the estate was under the control of Cornelius Holloway, Jeremiah's son, who had inherited the land and added 2 dangerous obsessions of his own. First was photography, a new art form that enthralled him with its ability to preserve truth, or at least his version of it. He had turned an entire wing of the mansion's basement into a fully equipped darkroom, producing portraits for society women while privately documenting what he called the real South candid images of field laborers, street life, and anthropological subjects. But Cornelius's second passion was far more sinister. Unlike his father, who had been considered a comparatively gentle figure in antebellum terms, Cornelius was notorious for his love of psychological and physical domination. Workers both black and white feared him not just for the power he held, but for the cruel satisfaction he seemed to take in wielding it. The Holloway family in 1876 consisted of Cornelius, his wife Margaret, an ailing woman numbed by laudanum, and their 3 children. Edwin, 28, had his father's cruelty, but lacked his intelligence. Caroline, 25, used her cleverness to inflict social torment on those she deemed inferior. The youngest, Thomas, 22, returned from Vanderbilt with progressive ideas about labor that clashed with his family's values, though he lacked the courage to challenge them. The manor employed around 60 laborers, a mix of sharecroppers and servants, many of whom were formerly enslaved. Though no longer legal property, they remained trapped in a system of economic coercion that differed from slavery only in name. Overseeing this fragile workforce was Ezekiel Hayes, a quiet, literate man in his 40s, who had served as foreman since 1869. His ability to read and write made him both indispensable to Cornelius and a potential threat. Unlike many, Hayes had managed to save a modest sum over the years, and whispers around the estate suggested he hoped to one day purchase a small farm of his own. in a world still ruled by hierarchy and memory. That dream may have been seen as defiance, and defiance on Holloway land never went unpunished. What the Holloway family never suspected was that Ezekiel Hayes possessed a skill far more dangerous than literacy. In his youth, he had apprenticed briefly with a traveling photographer, quietly learning the fundamentals of camera operation and photo development. It was knowledge he concealed wisely, understanding that in Reconstruction-era Tennessee, information could be more powerful than wealth. By the fall of 1876, tension at Ravens Hollow Manor had reached a boiling point. A ruined tobacco harvest had slashed profits, and Cornelius Holloway became increasingly abusive. Families who tried to leave were told their debts forbade it. Those who challenged him faced public beatings, some of which Cornelius began photographing as deterrent documentation images he claimed would serve as warnings to anyone questioning his rule. The morning of October 13th began with a chill that seemed to sink into the bones of everyone on the estate. Cornelius had spent the previous night in his darkroom, developing what he proudly called "my finest work," though he refused to show Margaret, dismissing them as too sophisticated for a woman's eyes. By sunrise, the household settled into its routine. Margaret stayed confined to her room, lost in another laudanum-induced haze. Edwin rode out to investigate rumors of sabotage. Caroline played hostess to a friend from Nashville, painting a genteel image of plantation life. Thomas sat in the library drafting business letters and battling rising guilt over the family's treatment of workers. Meanwhile, Cornelius, uncharacteristically upbeat, was preparing his camera gear. He had received word that several workers were meeting in secret in a disused tobacco barn and planned to catch them in the act, on film, adding another lesson to his collection. But Cornelius was walking into a trap. Hayes, thanks to a network of informants among the staff, already knew about Cornelius's plan. Sarah Hutchkins, who cleaned the darkroom, had seen the grotesque turn his photos had taken. Images, not of justice, but of humiliation. She had also uncovered a darker truth. Cornelius had been selling the most degrading of these photographs to other plantation owners, profiting from the agony of his own workers and feeding the appetites of men just as twisted as himself. When Cornelius entered the barn at 2:30 p.m., with 2 hired enforcers at his side, he expected fear and submission. Instead, he found Hayes and a dozen others standing quietly in the center, calm and resolute. Mr. Holloway, Hayes said in his soft voice, "I believe it's time we had a conversation about the nature of respect." Cornelius, confident as ever, raised his camera. "The only conversation we'll be having, Ezekiel, is the one these photographs will have with anyone else foolish enough to challenge me." That's when Hayes revealed his own camera, a modest hand-built device fashioned from discarded parts and the knowledge he'd silently accumulated over years. "Funny thing about photographs," he said, voice even. "They tell the truth, whether we want them to or not. And I've been documenting some truths of my own. What happened next wouldn't be fully understood until 1903, when the buried photographs were finally unearthed. For nearly 2 years, Hayes had been recording the Holloways' cruelty in secret, every act of violence, every humiliation captured with precision. But he hadn't done it to pursue legal justice. He was building a record for something far more personal. The photos revealed that the event in the barn wasn't a sudden rebellion, but the opening move in a meticulously planned campaign of retribution. Hayes and his allies subdued Cornelius and his guards, but they didn't kill them right away. Instead, they turned Cornelius's obsession with photography against him. Using his own equipment, they forced him to document the events that followed frame by agonizing frame, making him witness and archivist to his family's unraveling. The first public sign that something had gone terribly wrong at Ravens Hollow came that evening when Edwin failed to return from the fields. As night fell over Ravens Hollow Manor, unease crept through its halls. Caroline grew increasingly agitated, not from concern for her missing brother Edwin, but because his absence was ruining her meticulously planned dinner with a guest from Nashville. The visit had been orchestrated to showcase the family's prestige, and the disruption was an embarrassment. Thomas tried organizing a search party, only to discover that most of the workers had quietly vanished. The few servants who remained moved through the house with an eerie calm, their faces betraying a flicker of anticipation as if they knew something the family didn't. Margaret Holloway emerged from her chambers for the first time in days, rambling about strange dreams, filled with camera shutters clicking in time with the sound of chopping wood. Her family dismissed it as another laudanum-induced hallucination, but the knowing glances exchanged by the staff suggested her subconscious might have picked up on something. Real sounds she was no longer lucid enough to understand. Despite fires crackling in every hearth, the mansion felt colder with each passing hour. Caroline's friend, unsettled by the heavy atmosphere, abruptly announced she would leave in the morning, citing vague family obligations. Then just before 10 p.m., a strange sound broke the silence, a metallic clicking, irregular and unnatural. Caroline assumed it was a faulty clock, while Thomas reasoned it might be farm equipment left running. But when he reached for the front door to check, the clicking stopped, replaced by a silence that felt far more ominous. What none of them realized was that Ezekiel Hayes and his allies had spent hours surrounding the manor, using their intimate knowledge of the estate's layout to remain unseen. The clicking was the synchronized operation of concealed cameras, capturing images of the Holloway's rising fear from angles only insiders could anticipate. The photographs recovered in 1903 revealed that this wasn't just a plan for execution. It was a psychological assault calculated to instill the same terror the Holloways had inflicted on others for years. Hayes had studied each family member the way Cornelius once studied his photographic subjects, identifying vulnerabilities with chilling precision. Caroline, obsessed with social status, feared humiliation above all. Hayes ensured her downfall by sending letters complete with evidence to her social circle in Nashville, detailing the Holloways' brutal treatment of workers. Her reputation would be in ruins, even if she survived the night. Thomas, racked by doubt about the value of his education and progressive ideals, was made to face a far crueler fate. Hayes forged documents implicating him in embezzlement, creating a damning paper trail that would strip him of credibility and future prospects, regardless of the outcome. For Margaret, trapped in the haze of her laudanum addiction, Hayes devised a uniquely cruel form of torment. He had secretly replaced her drug supply with a harmless placebo days earlier, ensuring that she would spend her final hours not only confused, but suffering through acute withdrawal. Her grip on reality unraveling as the horror closed in. This night at Raven's Hollow wasn't about revenge alone. It was a performance, a reckoning meticulously recorded in images meant to turn the Holloways into the subjects of a narrative they could neither control nor escape. But it was Cornelius Holloway who became the centerpiece of Ezekiel Hayes' plan. Hayes had discovered that Cornelius's true pride lay not in his wealth or status, but in his mastery of photography, the ability to control, preserve, and manipulate power through the lens. The photographs recovered in 1903 would reveal how Hayes turned that obsession into the very weapon of Cornelius's undoing, forcing him to capture the downfall of his own family with the same precision he had once used to immortalize their cruelty. As midnight approached on October 13th, the Holloways huddled in the main parlor, pretending everything was fine, while silently acknowledging a threat far greater than they could name. The servants were long gone, the house eerily quiet, and a gnawing sense of exposure gripped them. Caroline was the first to notice signs of intrusion. Her jewelry box had been opened, not looted, but rearranged its contents, seemingly staged for photographs. Thomas checked the study and found similar signs. Papers had been photographed, then returned to their exact positions. It wasn't theft. Someone had been cataloging their lives. The most disturbing discovery came from Margaret. In her private chambers, she found a series of photographs showing herself in various stages of laudanum-induced stupor, images clearly taken without her knowledge across weeks or even months. Someone had been watching them, documenting their secrets from within their own walls. The sound of slow, deliberate footsteps on the front porch cut through their rising panic. These were not the hurried steps of a messenger or a neighbor, but the steady, confident tread of people who knew they were in control. Thomas called through the locked door, trying to assert authority. "Who's there? What do you want?" The response came in Ezekiel Hayes's unmistakable voice, calm but laced with a steel edge the family had never heard before. "Mr. Thomas, I believe your family has something that belongs to us. We've come to collect what's owed." "We've settled our accounts, Ezekiel's," Caroline replied, her voice faltering. "Father has always been fair in business." "I'm not talking about money," Miss Caroline Hayes replied. Outside, they could hear the movement of people, footsteps circling the house, wood creaking under pressure, gravel shifting. And beneath it all, that now familiar metallic clicking echoed again, the sound of multiple cameras snapping photos in the dark. Then came Cornelius's voice, muffled but unmistakably laced with panic. For the first time, the family heard not confidence, but fear in the man who had ruled their lives. Margaret began to cry, her withdrawal blending with terror. "They're going to kill us," she whispered over and over. "They're going to kill us all." Thomas tried to rally them. "This is Tennessee. There are laws. There will be consequences." But Hayes's voice answered from just beyond the window. "Yes, Mr. Thomas, there are consequences. And after 7 years of watching your family break every law of human decency, it's time to see what those consequences really look like." Then, Edwin's voice joined the exchange, strained, robotic, clearly under duress. They want Father to come outside," he said. "They say they have photographs, evidence of things he's done." Caroline rushed to the window, but saw only shifting shadows. "Edwin, are you hurt? What do they want from us?" "They want justice," Edwin answered, his tone growing firmer, as if saying the words out loud was setting him free. "They want Father to see what he's created. And they want him to document it the same way he documented everything else." At last, the full scope of Hayes's plan became clear. This wasn't simple revenge. It was a deliberate reversal of roles. Cornelius, once the observer and orchestrator of suffering, would now be forced to photograph his own family's terror. He would become the instrument of justice, recording the very kind of helplessness he had so often inflicted. Thomas made a final desperate appeal. "Ezekiel, we can talk. There's no need for this. Let's resolve it like civilized men." But Hayes's reply was cold and final. "Your family stopped treating us like civilized men a long time ago. Tonight we're returning the favor. Now, I need Mr. Cornelius to come outside. He has work to do." The photographs, discovered 27 years later, revealed that Ezekiel Hayes had planned the night's events with the same meticulous care Cornelius Holloway once reserved for his darkroom. Every detail, from the placement of cameras to the psychological manipulation, had been designed to dismantle the Holloway family, emotionally forcing them to confront the consequences of their cruelty in the most direct and terrifying way possible. But Hayes had miscalculated one critical variable. He believed that Cornelius, stripped of control and faced with the destruction of everything he valued, would eventually submit. Instead, Cornelius's response was far more complex and far more dangerous. The standoff stretched on for nearly an hour. Hayes and his conspirators held their ground around the manor, while the Holloways remained barricaded inside. But as the minutes ticked by, the tension began to fracture both camps in unexpected ways. Inside the house, unity eroded quickly. Margaret's withdrawal was escalating, driving her into increasingly irrational fits as she demanded more laudanum no one could provide. Caroline's fear morphed into fury, not at their attackers, but at her father, whom she now openly blamed for creating the nightmare they were trapped in. Most revealing was Thomas. Quiet for much of the evening, he finally spoke the truth he had long buried. "Father's gone too far," he said, his voice low but steady. "Some of the things I've seen, the photos in his study." "We deserve what's coming." Caroline spun toward him, horrified. "How dare you take their side? They're criminals, murderers who want to destroy everything our family built. What we built is rotten." Thomas replied, a conviction rising in him even as he spoke. "It's been rotten for years. And Father made it worse, more cruel, more corrupt. Maybe it's time someone finally held us accountable." Outside, Hayes was grappling with his own challenges. A few of his fellow conspirators were growing anxious, worried that their prolonged absence might attract the attention of sympathetic locals or law enforcement. More troubling was Cornelius himself, who had begun engaging Hayes in conversation not in defiance, but with calculated interest. Ezekiel Cornelius called out, voice calm and measured. "If you truly want to document injustice, you need to understand how to do it properly. Light, composition, contrast, these things matter. A powerful image isn't just captured, it's constructed." It was a clever psychological ploy. By casting himself as a valuable advisor, Cornelius was attempting to shift the dynamic to turn himself from target to collaborator, hoping to create leverage for escape or manipulation. But Hayes had anticipated this. The recovered photos would later show that he hadn't just studied Cornelius's photographic technique, he had studied the man himself, recognizing his belief that expertise made him indispensable in any situation. "I appreciate your offer of assistance," Hayes replied coolly. "And you're right, your expertise is exactly what we need. But first, let's talk about the subject matter of your recent work." "My recent work?" Cornelius asked, the facade slipping. "Yes, the photographs of our people. The ones you've been selling to your friends in Memphis and Nashville. Images of humiliation, of suffering, marketed as entertainment. We found the correspondence, Mr. Holloway customer names, addresses, payments, even specific requests. You've turned our pain into your profit." The accusation struck like a blow. Cornelius's illicit side business, selling degrading photographs of the workers to wealthy clients, had been his most closely guarded secret. Only a few trusted customers knew the full scope, and even fewer knew of the detailed logs he kept. Inside the manor, the impact was immediate. Caroline, always proud of her social intuition, stood frozen as she realized she'd been completely unaware of her father's hidden enterprise. Thomas felt physically ill, recalling the moments when Cornelius insisted on photographing punishment sessions under the guise of documentation. Now he saw those moments for what they truly were, transactions in a business of dehumanization. And Margaret, half lost in withdrawal and despair, suddenly erupted into laughter. Wild, broken laughter. Of course, she gasped, tears streaming down her face. Of course he was selling them. Everything in this house gets sold. Why not our souls? With that revelation, the balance of psychological power shifted dramatically. Inside the house, the Holloway family was no longer united in fear. They were splintered by shame, betrayal, and dawning awareness of their own complicity. And outside, Hayes and his companions knew that they were no longer confronting a powerful dynasty, but the unraveling remnants of one. Hayes had already exposed that Cornelius Holloway's brutality wasn't just an expression of sadism. It was a profitable enterprise, a coldly calculated system that commodified human suffering. For the Holloway family, this revelation transformed their ordeal from a case of victimization into something far more damning, a reckoning for the legacy they had upheld profited from, and in many ways enabled. But Hayes was not yet finished. According to the photographs uncovered in 1903, the most devastating evidence was still to come, material that would blur the moral lines of the standoff and complicate the once clear roles of oppressor and oppressed. As the first light of October 14th crept over Raven's Hollow, Hayes made his final move. From their hidden positions, his fellow conspirators emerged and began assembling what could only be described as a makeshift photography studio. Reflective panels were positioned to control the morning light. Props deliberately chosen were set into place with chilling precision. This wasn't the setup for violence. It was the construction of a message. Mr. Holloway, Hayes called out, his voice steady. It's time for you to see the full extent of your legacy. What followed stunned even Cornelius. Out of the darkness came a portfolio of photographs, so damning, so comprehensive, that the plantation master, so proud of his eye for detail, could only stare in silence. Hayes had not merely documented abuse. He had captured the machinery of an entire system, the underpinnings of the Holloway empire exposed frame by frame. There were images of deteriorating worker cabins contaminated with materials known to cause illness, used intentionally to keep laborers dependent and desperate. Photos showed tampered weight scales used to cheat sharecroppers out of their earnings and falsified supply ledgers that guaranteed workers remained in debt. But the most explosive evidence revealed that the Holloways had committed outright wartime treason, deliberately shipping spoiled tobacco to Union Army suppliers while secretly reserving high-quality product for Confederate buyers. That betrayal, even years after the war, could still bring federal charges. Cornelius's voice cracked as fear began to cut through his arrogance. How did you get these photographs? The same way you got yours. Mr. Holloway, Hayes replied, voice flat. Patience, planning, and the right equipment. The difference is, my photographs document crimes. Yours celebrate them. Inside the manor, Thomas watched from the window, the last traces of familial loyalty bleeding away. He recognized himself in the evidence signatures on fraudulent records, his presence during exploitative negotiations. Caroline, too, saw herself laughing in the background of images where entire families were being socially isolated and humiliated on her command. Even Margaret had a place in the archive there. She was giving false statements to investigators. Her posture composed her testimony deadly. Finally, Caroline spoke, her voice nearly inaudible. What do you want from us? Justice, Miss Caroline, Hayes said. But not the kind you're thinking of. Then came a sound that froze them all. The unmistakable clicking of multiple cameras being readied in unison. The quiet rhythm echoed across the porch and into the parlor, the sound of shutters locking into place. It wasn't just intimidation. It was preparation. Mr. Holloway, Hayes continued. You're going to help us create a new kind of record. Images that show what happens when the natural order reasserts itself. When those who've been treated like animals remember they're human and act accordingly. Cornelius immediately grasped the implication. You want me to photograph my own family's execution? Hayes didn't flinch. I want you to create a masterpiece, Mr. Holloway. The defining work of your career. A document so haunting, so undeniable, that no one will ever forget what happened here. Long after all of us are gone, your images will remain. The photographs recovered in 1903 revealed that what unfolded next was not a simple act of execution, but a grim collaboration between executioner and subject, a bizarre artistic partnership that neither man had foreseen. Faced with the certainty of death and the opportunity to leave behind something lasting, Cornelius Holloway made a stunning decision. He agreed to participate. If we're going to do this, he declared, voice steadying into its familiar tone of command, we're going to do it properly. Real artistry requires more than pointing a camera and hoping for the best. So began one of the most disturbing photo sessions in American history. With Hayes guiding the narrative and Cornelius managing technical execution, the two men constructed a series of staged tableaus, not just documenting the Holloway family's deaths, but framing them as symbolic reckonings. Each scene was crafted to reflect not only the individual's role in the family's cruelty, but their confrontation with the consequences of that legacy. Margaret Holloway was first. Years of willful blindness had numbed her to the suffering around her, a denial sustained by her laudanum addiction. She was posed in her favorite parlor chair, encircled by dozens of empty laudanum bottles Hayes had collected over months. Cornelius adjusted reflectors with the practiced hand of a professional, analyzing the texture of her skin. "The lighting needs to show the decay," he said clinically. "The way the drug aged her, it tells a story of complicity through self-destruction." Hayes adjusted the camera angle to highlight the contrast between Margaret's faded beauty and the chaos of her environment. In the final shot, her eyes were closed, her face serene as if relief had finally replaced dread. She whispered something that might have been a prayer, and then Hayes's blade ended her life with quiet precision. Caroline's execution required greater spectacle, befitting her reputation as the family's social strategist and emotional manipulator. She was surrounded by mirrors, dozens of them, arranged to reflect her image endlessly. Letters from her Nashville friends, now aware of the Holloway's crimes, were scattered at her feet like fallen petals. "She needs to see herself," Hayes said as he placed the final mirror. "See how others have seen her all these years." Cornelius meticulously calibrated the camera settings to ensure every reflection was crisp. "The repetition creates judgment," he agreed. "Each angle shows a different truth, but the vanity never changes." When Caroline grasped the purpose of the mirrors, that each represented the eyes of those she had shamed and manipulated, her composure shattered. The photographs captured not only her death, but the precise moment of self-realization when she finally saw herself as others had. Thomas was executed in his father's study, surrounded by the ledgers and receipts that chronicled years of deceit. Hayes arranged him at the desk, pen in hand, as though signing his own confession. Financial documents were stacked high around him, proof of the fraudulent schemes he once facilitated. "He always wanted to be the intellectual," Hayes observed as Cornelius lit the scene to create heavy shadows across the papers. "Let him use that intelligence to understand exactly what he's done." Before the final moment, Thomas was forced to read aloud from the documents, acknowledging each embezzlement and false account. One photograph, scrawled with his final words in Hayes's handwriting, read, "I knew it was wrong, but I was too weak to stop." But it was Edwin's execution that produced the most psychologically harrowing images of all. Hayes recreated the torture scenes Edwin had once orchestrated, complete with ropes, chains, and the very implements used on workers. Each phase of torment was staged and photographed with unnerving precision, while Cornelius documented it all with the detachment of a scientist. "This isn't revenge," Hayes said methodically, preparing the instruments. "This is education. He needs to experience what he made others endure." Witnesses later recalled Edwin's screams echoing across the grounds. But what haunted them most were the silences between when Cornelius would pause to reposition the lights and recalibrate the frame, directing the moment as though nothing was happening beyond the lens. The final photograph showed Edwin gazing directly into the camera. He was no longer crying out or resisting. His face held a complex expression, pain, yes, but also understanding. In that final frame, he wasn't just dying. He was confronting the totality of what he had done. It wasn't just physical torment captured in that shot. It was the agony of moral recognition of a man who had finally seen himself clearly, moments before the end. Each execution was captured from multiple angles, illuminated with professional lighting and composed with such technical precision that the resulting images were both horrifying and undeniably artistic. Cornelius Holloway, ever the perfectionist, applied the same meticulous care he once reserved for society portraits to this final project, only now his subjects were his own family and his medium was their destruction. The most disturbing detail, according to the annotated notes recovered with the photographs, was how completely Cornelius embraced his role. He adjusted lights, offered critiques on composition, and gave technical advice with the same enthusiasm he had once shown in his studio. "Art demands truth," he declared, while preparing for the final series of images. And truth, it seems, demands sacrifice. Those final images depicted Cornelius himself, not as a broken man, but as someone who had found, in the act of documenting his downfall, a dark kind of artistic fulfillment. Hayes, using Cornelius's own camera and methods, captured portraits not of a victim, but of a creator who believed he had completed his magnum opus. He looked directly into the lens with the calm of a man who had accepted, even orchestrated his own ending. Afterward, the photographs were buried beneath the foundation of Raven's Hollow Manor. For 27 years, the truth remained hidden, while the sanitized version of events became local legend. According to official reports, the Holloway family had been murdered during a robbery gone wrong, carried out by unidentified workers who fled with valuables. That narrative satisfied everyone, with a stake in burying the deeper truths about power, exploitation, and institutional complicity in post-Reconstruction Tennessee. The sheriff, long on Cornelius's payroll, had no interest in an investigation that might expose his own role in suppressing worker complaints. Nearby plantation owners, many of whom had been discreet customers of Cornelius's degrading photography, welcomed a simple explanation that didn't implicate them in a wider system of abuse. No serious investigation was conducted. No suspects were named. Ezekiel Hayes and his co-conspirators disappeared in the days that followed their absence, dismissed as fear-driven flight rather than a sign of complicity. Raven's Hollow Manor stood abandoned, shunned by the community, its reputation quickly shifting from a site of tragedy to one of supernatural dread. Children dared each other to approach its gates, and adults whispered prayers while passing the overgrown estate. It wasn't until 1903, when railroads eyed the land for development, that the secrets beneath the soil began to surface. The buried photographs caused a national sensation. Newspapers as far away as New York and Chicago ran breathless headlines about the Tennessee terror pictures. Yet the greatest shock wasn't the evidence of the Holloway's crimes or even the brutal artistry of their deaths. It was the realization that Hayes had created something more than vengeance. He had produced a work of art. A searing visual record that forced viewers to confront uncomfortable questions about justice, power, and the blurred line between victim and monster. Contemporary accounts describe the photographs as impossible to ignore. Their technical brilliance, paired with their emotional depth, created a viewing experience that was equal parts revolting and mesmerizing. In 1904, a Nashville museum briefly exhibited the collection. Crowds lined up for hours to see what the press called the most disturbing images ever made in American photography. The exhibit closed within weeks after civic and religious leaders denounced it for moral corruption, but not before an estimated 10,000 visitors had witnessed the full, unflinching account of the Holloway family's downfall. After the exhibit's closure, the photographs vanished from public view. Rumors spread of copies hidden in private collections or secret archives, but no confirmed sightings ever surfaced. In 1905, the mansion was finally demolished. The railroad company overseeing the project ordered all remaining materials burned on site, unwilling to risk repurposing the tainted wood or stone. Demolition workers later claimed they uncovered hidden rooms and narrow passageways, hinting that even more secrets may have existed, ones Hayes never captured. Today, the site of Raven's Hollow Manor is occupied by a railroad switching station. There are no plaques, no memorials, nothing to acknowledge what happened there. But according to local folklore, train engineers still report strange sounds and flickering lights when passing through at night. Some say it's just the wind. Others claim it's the click of unseen cameras, still documenting, still watching long after the house and everyone in it was reduced to ash and myth. Clicking noises, faint yet unmistakable, are still said to echo from beneath the earth near the site where Raven's Hollow Manor once stood, accompanied by fleeting glimpses of shadowy figures holding cameras seen only at the edges of industrial light. But beyond folklore, the legacy of the Holloway photographs left a real and lasting impact. The case marked a turning point in the use of photography as a tool of social justice. For the first time, law enforcement and reformers began to understand the potential of systematic visual documentation in exposing abuse, especially in places where power had long shielded the guilty. The techniques Hayes employed would go on to influence everything from factory investigations to tenement exposés. His work laid the foundation for using images not just to record injustice, but to indict it. Yet the question that haunted everyone who viewed the Raven's Hollow photographs remained. Had Ezekiel Hayes achieved justice or simply replicated cruelty in a more refined and psychologically devastating form? By forcing Cornelius Holloway to document his own family's downfall, with the same cold precision he had once used to record the pain of others, had Hayes created a form of poetic justice or simply proven that he was capable of equal cruelty? Like the photographs themselves, the answer resists easy classification. It exists in the same moral gray space where vengeance and justice often blur. What cannot be denied is that Hayes succeeded in creating something unforgettable, images that disturbed, challenged, and lingered in the minds of those who saw them long after the events of October 1876 had faded from living memory. More than a century later, the story of Raven's Hollow Manor remains a haunting reminder that the relationship between power and documentation is as fraught and ethically complex as ever. In today's world where nearly everyone carries a camera and the ability to capture and distribute images is no longer confined to the elite, the legacy of Hayes and Holloway echoes louder than ever. Their grim collaboration stands as both a warning and a testament, a demonstration of photography's immense power to expose truth, deliver reckoning, and create art born from atrocity. The workers who unearthed the photographs in 1903 claimed they couldn't sleep for weeks afterward, not merely because of the violence depicted, but because they realized they were looking at something disturbingly beautiful. A masterpiece shaped by the darkest corners of human nature. And perhaps the most chilling part of this story isn't what the photographs revealed about the past, but what they suggested about the future. Hayes showed that documentation isn't just about preserving history. It's about shaping it. He transformed victims into executioners, executioners into artists, and turned a crime into a commentary on justice itself. Just when it seems the horror of Raven's Hollow Manor has been fully uncovered, new fragments emerge, details that make the truth even harder to face. If this story of buried photographs, calculated revenge, and morally tangled justice sent a chill down your spine, share this video with someone who appreciates dark historical mysteries. Hit that like button to support our journey into the shadows of America's hidden past, and subscribe so you never miss another story like this. Let's continue uncovering what lies buried beneath the polished surface of our nation's past. According to those few who saw it before, the images vanished from public view. The final photograph in Ezekiel Hayes' collection was the most haunting of all. It was a self-portrait captured using a timing mechanism of his own invention, showing Hayes standing alone among the bodies of the Holloway family, Cornelius's camera clutched in his hands. But his expression wasn't one of triumph. There was no pride, no vengeance in his face, only sorrow. Deep, soul-crushing sorrow. The look of a man who had accomplished everything he set out to do, and found that justice, when achieved through blood, tastes no different than loss. Beneath the image, written in Hayes' precise handwriting, was a single line, an epitaph, not just for the Holloways, but for himself. Sometimes justice and tragedy are the same thing, separated only by the perspective of the observer. This mystery reminds us that the tools of power can indeed be turned against those who once wielded them, but that transformation always comes at a price. A price not just paid by the guilty, but by everyone caught in the wake. The boundary between justice and revenge, between documentation and exploitation, between art and atrocity, may be far thinner than we'd like to believe. What do you think? Did Ezekiel Hayes deliver justice, or did he become a reflection of the very cruelty he sought to destroy? Are there other collections, like this, evidence of forgotten reckonings, buried in the shadows of America's polite historical record, still waiting to be unearthed? Share your thoughts in the comments. We read everyone and often highlight the most thought-provoking responses in future videos. If this journey into America's darkest photographic secrets left you shaken or more curious than ever, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Hit the notification bell so you never miss another deep dive into the stories most textbooks would rather forget. And share this video with someone who understands that the most terrifying stories are often the ones that could have happened, and maybe did. Until next time, remember, every old house has its secrets, every family has its shadows, and sometimes the most important truths are the ones someone went to great lengths to bury. We'll see you in the next video, where we'll uncover another mystery that proves the past isn't dead. It's just waiting for the right person to dig it up. Thank you all very much for watching my video until the end. I sincerely appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.